After years of struggling with color grading my footage, I finally found it. I have finally found a simple workflow and technique in DaVinci Resolve that has allowed me to create good-looking cinematic footage on repeat. And in this video, I'm not only going to show you how to do it, but I've linked in the description my color grading node tree that you can import and follow along with me. So if you're ready, let's dive into DaVinci Resolve. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do, if you want to follow along with this video, is we're going to import my node tree. So to do this, we're going to jump over to the color page and we're going to go up here in the top left corner to the gallery. Now in the gallery, we want to create a new power grade album. So in this area, we're going to right click, click add power grade album, and we're going to rename it CWC Create with Charles node tree. So now we've created this album, we need to import the node tree. And here's how to do that. We want to right click over here in this empty section and we want to click on import. Then we're going to find the file that you should have downloaded, linked in the description. And we're going to click on the file name that says basic grade and click import. And now you should see a still image in this area. To apply it, all we simply have to do is right click, apply grade. And then you should see the nodes populate. Now, don't be turned off or scared by all these nodes. We're going to walk through each and every one so you understand what's going on. Not every node has to be used, all right? That is important to remember. Not every node has to be used. You only need to use what helps you create the image that you're trying to create. So let's walk through these nodes one by one to see what they're doing and how to transform this image that we have here in my viewer. So first things first, we have a noise reduction node. Now this is optional. So if your video is super grainy, you're going to want to turn this on. This one's not too grainy, so we're going to ignore it for now. Next, we have what's called our color space transform. And we actually have two of these. So let's look at that first because this is really important to understanding how to color grade. So we have two nodes here that I'm leaving active. We have this color space transform, which is taking from the camera settings to DaVinci wide gamut color space. And then we have the second node that's taking it from DaVinci wide gamut to Rec 709. Let me show you what's going on in the effects panel. So in this first node, we have the input color space. The input color space is what comes from your camera. So I shot this on a Blackmagic. So I just looked up the Blackmagic color space for my particular camera and I input the color space, which is Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 4.5. And then the input gamma is Blackmagic Design Video Gen 5. So if you have a Sony, it would be something like S-Log. If you have a Fuji, it would be something like F-Log. You want to figure out your input color space or the color space of your camera in the gamma. Then we want to transform it to DaVinci wide gamut. So DaVinci wide gamut is the color space we're trying to transform to, and DaVinci intermediate is the output gamma. And we do this because the DaVinci wide gamut color space has more colors in it. It has more colors available to work with. That's why we start by transforming our camera to DaVinci wide gamut. Now we do a whole bunch of color grading in between, and then at the end we output or we switch back from DaVinci wide gamut color space to Rec 709, which is what most TV broadcasts, TV, your phone, that's the color space that you see it in. All right, so that's all these things are doing. The only thing that you're going to have to change on your end is the input color space of your particular camera on the first node. Everything else is set up for you. So that's the only thing that you have to change. Next, we have our blacks. What's going on here is that we are softening some of the detail to create a more softened cinematic look. And so if you come down over here to the primary color wheel section, you'll see this mid detail area. And so what I've done is I've just simply dragged it down to -100 to soften the image. You can turn this on or off. This is just a preference. You don't have to keep it on there, or you can reduce it and make it a little bit less softened. It's completely up to you. But the only thing you need to change here is the mid Detail. Moving forward, here's where I do my balancing and my exposure adjustments. So usually when you import footage, a lot of times you're importing log footage. It's coming squashed, meaning that there's no contrast. It's very washed out looking. And so we want to adjust the exposure to bring back some of that contrast, to fix anything that's overexposed or try to bring up anything that's crushed if we can in this node. Looking at this image, I'm going to look over here at my scopes, and I like to start with my waveform scope just to see the luminance of the image. So what I can see is that we don't have anything that's overexposed, which would reflect on this waveform going up over 100, and we don't have anything crushed, which would represent itself as under 0 or at 0. So our image is, for the most part, properly exposed, maybe a little bit underexposed because it's nighttime or evening time. So what I want to do first is I want to lift some of the high end to bring back a little more light. I'll use the offset wheel and I'll lift it just slightly, ever so slightly. And then what I'll do is I'll bring down the lift or the shadows even more to create a little more contrast. And so I'm trying to bring them down. I'll probably bring it down here. If I toggle this on and off, it's a very subtle adjustment because I didn't want to go too crazy on this node. The reason why I don't want to go too crazy on this one is because I want to bring out some of the colors in the sky. And if I lift it too much, or if I raise the gain too much, I'm not going to get as much color in the sky. So that's all I'm doing here. But essentially in this node, all you want to do is you want to manipulate the gain or the highlights, the lifts or the shadows, the gamma, the midtones to get the image properly exposed. And you want to make sure that nothing is going over 100, which is clipping, and anything under 0, which is crushing the shadows. So the next node that we have in this node tree is the contrast. Now in the contrast, the only thing I'm manipulating here is in the curves tool. And what I'm going to do here is create my own S curve so I can add a lot more contrast to this particular image. One of the things I want to do before I try to manipulate this curve is I want to make sure I turn on editable splines. And so what I'll start by doing is I'll start by bringing down the high end even more. But what I'll do is I'll lift so I can get a little more light in the midtones without lifting too much in the highlights. And so I'll actually bring this down even more, and I'll begin to just adjust it to where it looks good to me. The second thing I'll do with the shadows is I'll lift the shadows a little bit too, but I'll bring it down to add in a little more contrast to make the shadows a little bit darker until I get it to where I want it to be. So if I toggle this on and off, now you can see it's a lot more contrast. The highlights look a little bit brighter. The shadows look a little bit faded, a little bit darker. But it's coming around to the image that I want. Now looking at this image, I may even go back to the balance node. I may even bring the lift down a little bit more. One of the things I'm noticing is that the subject, which is me, is a little bit dark. And so I'm going to address this with a power window. I'll show you that a little bit later. The next thing we have is the saturation node. Here is where I do saturation a little bit different. You can simply come down here to the primaries, go down to the saturation wheel and just boost it up. But you see how it looks kind of crazy. It doesn't look good. And one of the reasons why is that when you boost the saturation here, the way it works is that it will tend to make your image brighter. If you see over here in the scopes, as I raise the saturation, it also raises the highlights. So that's not what I want, right? I did all this work to get it exposed the way I wanted to. So how do we fix that? Well, what we do is we transform, or we set the color space for this particular node to, I use HSV, which stands for hue, saturation, and value. Value is loosely related to brightness. And then the second thing I do is I go to my channels and I turn off channel 1 and channel 3. And I leave channel 2 on because channel 2 corresponds to saturation. So what we're doing in this node is that we're going to be able to use our log wheels to manipulate the saturation only. The hue won't be affected. The brightness won't be affected. It's only going to be the saturation. So what we'll do is I like to start with the gamma log wheel. And so what I'll do is I'll raise this up. Now, the gamma log wheel is going to increase the saturation in areas that aren't already really saturated. Subtle adjustments here. I'll raise this up to maybe about 0.5. And as you can see already, if I toggle this on and off, my goodness, look how much color that is. Look how rich that is. But if you look at the waveform, the exposure hasn't changed. And so this is what we call subtractive saturation, where in the real world, if something's more saturated, it looks darker because it absorbs some of the light that's hitting it. And so in this instance, that's what we're doing. As we increase the saturation, we're not actually making the image brighter. We might be slightly making it a little bit darker. The next thing we'll do, and I'm gonna actually add, this is optional, but for this particular image, I wanna add this. We're gonna add a power window. What we're going to do is we're going to come down here to Windows, and we're going to create a circular window. And we're going to drag it around the subject, which is me, make it a little bit thinner, and then we're going to soften it all the way as much as we can. And we want to do this so that when we add some brightness to the subject, it's not going to be a noticeable difference between the subject and in the background. You'll see what I'm talking about. So what I'll do here is, now that I have this window, I'm going to just raise the output, add in some more light to the subject within the window. And so now if I turn this power window off, if I toggle it on and off, you can see I'm better exposed. And this is, the kind of look that I'm going for. Now, let's look at the window really quickly. So I softened it so you can see it's you really can't tell where the mask starts and stops. But let's just say I didn't do that, right? See how you can see this? You can see the window around me. And so that's why we soften. That's why we raise the softness until we pretty much can't see the window anymore, but we can still see the effects, or we can still see what's being affected by it. Moving forward, the next node we have is the Vignette node. I'm gonna toggle this on. And basically what this does is it adds a vignette around the subject to draw your attention to what's most important in the clip. And so this is also done by a power window. As you can see here, I've created somewhat of an ellipse around the image. And all I simply did was I inverted the power window, and then I decrease the gain and the gamma to create a vignette around the image. So all you have to do here is manipulate the gamma, the gain, and you can move around this power window however you want so that your subject becomes the focal point of your clip. Next up we have is glow. So I wanted to add a subtle glow, and I typically add a subtle glow to all my clips. And so this is already set up for you. The only thing that you really have to change here is the opacity, the bright region recovery, and the spread. The spread, the opacity, and the bright region recovery. If you want to change other stuff around and experiment, be my guest. But those are the main three things that I've tweaked on a case-by-case basis. So the spread is going to determine how much of the glow is spread out in the image. The opacity obviously is going to determine how heavy the effect is and how light the effect is. So I typically keep it around 0.2. And then the bright region recovery is going to try to recover some things in your image that are like too bright. The higher you turn it up, the more it's going to dim bright lights in your image. So we talked about the last color space transform node. Let's go into what we call the Sharpen node. And so in the Sharpen node, I'm going to try to bring back some more detail that we lost, if you remember, in our blacks node where we softened the image. We're going to go over to the blur tool here, and then we're going to make sure that we're on Sharpen. Now, what I do is, by default, the cornering softness and level aren't going to be at 50, so I set it to 50. This will already be set for you. You don't have to change it. But what I'll do is I'll scroll into the image a little bit, and I will bring the sharpness down until it looks good to me, maybe about 0.42. Now, the reason why I do it this way is that it gives you more flexibility with the sharpness tool. Usually, when you don't do it this way, you really can't go past 0.48, 47. But when you do it this way, it allows you to sharpen it a little bit more without it looking bad. So yeah, toggle it on and off, and it brings back some detail in your image. Next, we have the LUT. So here's where you can drop in your own LUTs, or you can grab one of my LUTs linked in the description below, and you can drop it here. And what this will do is it'll give the final creative look to your image. And so as you can see with my LUT, it brings in a little more blues in the image. This is an orange and teal LUT, so it's going to try to push the blues a little turquoise. Let's just talk about how you add it. So you can right click this node, go down to LUT, and go through all the LUTs that you have and just add one. So I'm going to drop in my orange tail LUT. And then you want to come down here to key, and here's where you can set the intensity of the LUT. So by default, 1 is the highest intensity. I typically keep mine between 0.3 and 0.5. So it's more of a subtle look, but it does make a difference, and I'll toggle it on and off. And as you can see, it gives it a little bit, a little something extra, right? So that's all you have to do if you want to add a LUT. That's how you add a LUT here. The last node that I will add is the film look node. This is DaVinci's new film look effect that pretty much works like the enhancer, where you can just, it gives you a variety of settings where you can create a more cinematic look. And I don't really do too much in here on most of my, edits, but it has the ability to do a lot. So I'm gonna just kind of walk you through what I do, and then you can just play around with this and do whatever you want. By default, it's going to be at default 65 mm. It'll make your image look a particular way. You may not like that. So what I do is I come down to presets and I click on clean slate. It resets all the settings and allows you complete control over creating an image that you want. So one of the things I do first is I add some fade. It kind of lifts the shadows and gives you more of a cinematic look. And so I will slightly add a little bit fade. If I add a lot, you'll see that the shadows are lifted a lot. I don't want it that lifted, but I'll add a little bit where it's noticeable, somewhere around here, 0.3. Sometimes I add a bleach bypass, which is also a film look, but I'm not going to do that for this. I don't really like it. If I do, it'll just be subtle. The last thing I'll do is I'll add some grain. So I'll enable the grain, and I'll just play around with this until I get something that I like. I'll typically zoom in to see what's going on, add a little bit of it. Maybe I'll increase the size of the grain just a little bit, maybe some of the soften it up a little bit, and voila. I've added grain to my image. And that is it for my node tree. This is a very basic node tree, one that I use as a starting point for almost all my footage, and it gives me really great results. Let's hop over into the window and let's see the difference between the beginning and the end. So this is what it was before we started, and this is what it was after. I mean, the colors are popping. It's giving a particular look. I love it. That's how I do that. I'll be dropping more tutorials on how I color grade. I am not a professional colorist, but I'm a filmmaker and I have to get better at color grading. I can't always afford to hire a pro colorist on all my projects. And so I want to be able to, get 80% of the way there. Chances are, if you care about your videos looking good, you probably care about them performing good. So check out this video on the 3 things you need to focus on to create a viral video.